Hello everyone, and welcome to Dutch Greybeard. This Stormlight Archive reading experience will be different from my previous two. For The Way of Kings and Words of Radiance, I made a vlog, recording my impressions of the book after reading a couple of hundred pages each time. That resulted in way too much video footage, which required extensive and time-consuming editing. So I thought I'd make a video this time in my usual way. First finish reading the book, write out a script, and then hit the record button. It turned out that the writing of the script while leafing through the 1300 plus pages, scanning my underlinings and notes in the margins, took up a huge chunk of time. Either way, these big books simply require a lot of time to make the kind of reading experience I want to make. There seems to be no getting around that. So, about 2 weeks after finishing my read of Oathbringer, I can finally present you with a video of my reading experience. At the beginning of August, I started my reading project of the Stormlight Archive. Like many other readers, I wanted to have finished reading the first 4 books by the time book 5, Wind and Truth, was published on December 6. The theory of this plan sounded feasible. However, in real life, I have to admit that this project is just a bit too ambitious for me. My main objective in reading is to have a good time. As soon as I find that reading a book becomes a chore, or even worse, I need to trace back my steps and recreate the situation where I was still enjoying myself. This almost happened while I was reading Oathbringer. For the first time, I experienced Stormlight Archive fatigue. This is what Brandon Sanderson himself warns his readers about. Don't underestimate the strain a book of this length can put on you as a reader. As I've mentioned in another video, if the gratification of finishing a book takes a very, very long time, it inevitably influences your reading experience. The first 2 books in the Stormlight Archive took me 16 days to read, but for Oathbringer I needed 29 days. This amount of time and the underlying Stormlight fatigue don't necessarily say anything about my appreciation of this book. I loved it. As with the first 2 videos on this series, I will be talking full spoilers. Otherwise it is impossible for me to bring across my experience. So, spoiler alert. If you haven't read this book yet, please come back to watch this video after you've done so. I apologize that this video is not for you. Alright, let's begin. The beginning of Oathbringer right away grabs hold of me. It is a wonderful feeling to be back in Roshar. The start of the book is very strong and compelling. On page 78, I write, loving it, better than The Way of Kings or Words of Radiance up until now. From the beginning, Dalinar hears this voice in his head saying, unite them. The meaning of these words change regularly. Every time he seems to be sure of who or what he has to unite, I think, nah, it has to mean something else. We finally get to know what he will unite at the end of this book. At some point, Kaladin flies to his hometown to see how his parents have weathered the Everstorm. After he is reunited with his parents, there is this beautiful piece of prose. What a surreal sensation being back here, being treated like he was still the boy who had left for war 5 years ago. 3 men bearing their son's name had lived and died in that time. The soldier who had been forged in Amaram's army, the slave so bitter and angry. His parents had never met Captain Kaladin, bodyguard to the most powerful man in Roshar. And then there was the next man, the man he was becoming. A man who owned the skies and spoke ancient oaths. 5 years had passed, and for lifetimes. Like in all Stormlight books, We get small pieces of the puzzle, like the snippets we get about what Spren actually are. Syl says to Kaladin that his parents are just like she remembers them. Remember them? Kaladin whispered. Syl, you never knew me when I lived here. That's true, she said. So how can you remember them? Kaladin said, frowning. Because I do, Syl said, flitting around him. Everyone is connected, Kaladin. Everything is connected. I didn't know you then, but the winds did, and I am of the winds. I really like the explanation of Syl about the character of certain Spren when they talk about the Stormfather. Kaladin says that the Stormfather could be more helpful than he is. He's a storm, Kaladin, as people over millennia have imagined him. He could choose. Perhaps, perhaps not. I think what you're doing is like asking fire to please stop being so hot. The Dalinar flashbacks in the beginning didn't do much for me. I remember thinking that if every one of those is going to be a battle scene, I may just as well skip them or read them very fast. If it wasn't for the bits and pieces of information Sanderson drops here. The dialogues with Shallan can be very funny at times. But, I mean, you're a woman. Was it the makeup that tipped you off? Or the dress? Ah, it was the breasts, wasn't it? Always giving us away. I admire the way the writer portrays Shallan's schizophrenia. Gradually and almost imperceptibly, Radiant, Shallan, Vale blend more and more. She let herself be Shallan in some of the moments, but whenever the pain of holding the sword started to spike, she was able to become Radiant and avoid it. Later on, Shallan, Vale and Radiant switch places every 2 sentences. Also the way truth and illusion become tangled up in one another is wonderfully described. The whole reveal of Dalinar's past and the extremely traumatic events at Rathalas are very impactful to read. The marriage to Evie or Evi was not filled with love, but there certainly was mutual respect. Gradually the readers learn more about Dalinar and that he may not be such a good guy after all. The fact that bit by bit his own past is revealed to him is unique. He had certain parts of his memories erased by the so-called Night Watcher. Once erased, they never return, or so Navani has researched. In each case I've looked into, the boon and curse both lasted until death. Dalinar explains about the Night Watcher. She's a Spren. I don't think we can expect her to play by or even understand our rules. Once Dalinar has regained his memory of his former wife, Evie, he remembers more clearly who he was. To me, so far, Dalinar, even though being called the Blackthorn and the way he wreaked havoc during fierce battle scenes, seemed to be this benevolent and wise man who wanted nothing but the best for his people and the world in general. Now, these memories definitely fill in the gap in that respect, where he becomes this almost mindless fighting machine. I find this dialogue between Evie and him telling in that respect. Must everything be fighting to you? He shrugged. She leaned her head on his arm. Can't you just enjoy it, Dalinar? Enjoy what? Your life. It's like you're dead. It's like you only live when you can fight, when you can kill. Like a blackness from old stories. You live only by taking lives from others. Or this sequence where Evie describes Dalinar when he is possessed by the thrill. Sometimes you get this look in your eyes, a horrible, terrifying nothingness, like you have become a creature with no heart, feasting upon souls to fill that void, dragging pain spren in your wake. She doesn't get much screen time, but I really love the character of Evie. She has the same beliefs as Im, the character in one of my favorite interludes in Words of Radiance. We will know eventually when we return to the One. We're all different aspects of the One. All this time, from the Way of Kings, we have known that the memories regarding Dalinar's wife were too painful. Finally, in chapter 76, all is revealed. Storms. He remembered. It came crashing down on him, the weight of 1,000 boulders. He remembered what had happened to Evie. This chapter indeed is gut-wrenching and heartbreaking. Sanderson, by word of some of his characters, says interesting things about art, like on page 298, regarding Dalinar. He needed more than vague explanations and abstract ideas, but those were the very soul of art. If you could explain something perfectly, then you'd never need art. This returns in one of those great dialogues between Shallan and Wit, which are my favorite parts of Oathbringer. During the telling of the story of the girl who looked up, Wit says that he is an artist, not a teacher, to which Shallan says, "People learn things from art." Blasphemy! Art is not art if it has a function. Here is a short collection of phrases and sentences that I loved for their beauty and or profoundness. Here we go. There had once been a banister for the steps, but it had fallen to the effect of time. Her brother and her uncle, who she knew loved each other deeply, ground their wills against one another like mismatched gears. You should never debate an idiot, Shallan, no more than you'd use your best sword to spread butter. Hedonism has never been enjoyment, Shallan, but the opposite. They take the wonderful things of life and indulge until they lose savour. It's listening to beautiful music, performed so loud as to eliminate all subtlety. King Taravangian has stupid days most of the time, but sometimes he has a day of intelligence. When that happens is worded beautifully in one of the interludes. He finally felt himself after so many days trapped in the mausoleum of his own flesh, his mind like a master painter, allowed only to whitewash walls. During a visionary meeting between Dalinar and Nohadon, the author of the book The Way of Kings, Nohadon says, "But maybe you shouldn't be looking for life to be easier because you choose to do something that is right. Personally, I think life is fair. It's merely that often you can't immediately see what balances it." When Kaladin draws in a huge amount of stormlight at the end of the book, we are treated to this beautiful line. Within the power's embrace, a lifetime's worth of moments seemed to snap into place. Just before Dalinar unites the three realms, Kaladin in Shadesmar is about to yield before the fused he is fighting. At that moment, Syl says to him, "Maybe you don't have to save anyone, Kaladin. Maybe it's time for someone to save you." To me, the main theme of this series is truth, justice, right versus wrong, good versus evil. Good and evil blend and become less recognizable as the story progresses. What is good and what is evil? And who decides on this matter? And by what standards? Etc. All these questions are at the core of the story, and the way truth, lies, good, evil, and so on keep on evading any objective approach returns in everything. Like this dialogue between Kaladin and Syl about the revolting Parshmen. They conquered the city. They're Voidbringers. No, they're people, and they're angry with good reason. You changed your mind about Elhokar, Kaladin. You saw what was right. Did I? Did I find what was right? Or did I just finally agree to see things the way you wanted? Killing Elhokar was wrong. And the Parshmen on the Shattered Plains that I killed, murdering them wasn't wrong? You were protecting Dalinar. Who was assaulting their homeland? What's the difference between Dalinar attacking the Parshmen and these Parshmen conquering that city? I don't know, she said softly. And why was it worse for me to let Elhokar be killed for his injustices than it was for me to actively kill Parshmen on the Shattered Plains? What is wrong? I mean, it just feels wrong. Both do, I guess. Except one nearly broke my bond while the other didn't. The bond isn't about what's right and wrong, is it, Syl? It's about what you see as right and wrong. The doubt within Kaladin is the same as my own doubt every time I read about truth, lies, justice, evil, and such. Who are truly the Voidbringers? And what is this evil the Sword Nightblood so eagerly wants to destroy? In the first 2 volumes, we were more or less aware of the good guys and the bad guys, although we never really found out who these Voidbringers actually were. Everyone could be called a Voidbringer. Even Lift called her own spren, Windle, a Voidbringer. This theme of good versus evil is present in all the dialogues between Nightblood and Seth. Nightblood only wants to destroy evil, to which Seth asks, "And what is evil, Swordnimi?" Another absolutely beautiful and profound development is how Seth is questioning the truth of good and evil. Nin, who guides him, is also known as Nail and by other names. He is one of the 10 heralds. He is called the Herald of Justice. Partly thanks to his experience as the truthless assassin, Seth learns very fast to become a Knight Radiant. He quickly advances through the ideals of the Knight. By the way, with each new ideal spoken come extra powers. In that respect, you might regard Stormlight Archive as progression fantasy. However, this only goes up until the 3rd ideal, I think, because the final ideals, as far as I know, are more a burden than that they add powers to the character. There are 5 ideals in total that may change slightly depending on which order swears them. Ideal 1, life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. Ideal 2, I will protect those who cannot defend themselves. Ideal 3, I will protect even those I hate, so long as it is right. But who decides what was right again? Ideal 4 remains unknown up until now. The 5th and final ideal states that the one who swears it becomes the law. When Seth is about to vow to the 3rd ideal, he doesn't trust himself to know what is right. I cannot see the right any longer. My own decisions are not trustworthy. His master, the Herald Nin, agrees. Our minds are fallible. This is why we must pick something external to follow. Only in strict adherence to a code can we approximate justice. Upon this, Seth decides to choose to obey a person instead of the law. Later on, it turns out he has chosen to follow Dalinar, his former target from when he was an assassin. I serve Dalinar Kholin. I cannot know truth, so I follow one who does. Around page 1100 of Oathbringer, the ancient language Dawn Chant has finally been translated. People can now read one of the oldest documents, the Ayla Stele. It speaks of the first coming of the Voidbringers. They come from another world. These Voidbringers knew no songs. They have no shells and only one heart. Then it clicks with Dalinar. That was not written by a human. No, uncle, Jasnah said softly. The writer was a dawn singer, one of the original inhabitants of Roshar. They were Parshmen, and the people they welcomed to their world, The other worlders were us, Dalinar whispered. He felt cold, like he'd been dunked in icy water. They named us Voidbringers. Up until this point, the humans believed their defense of their country and survival against what they thought were the Voidbringers was just. Turns out they are originally the aggressors. The so-called good guys actually turn out to have been the original invaders in ancient times, coming from a different planet and overpowering the natives on Roshar, which incidentally widens our perception of the Cosmere. This puts the whole story on its head, and it emphasizes in a huge way the dilemma of right and wrong. We learn more and more about the three different realms in this world, and probably each world: the physical, the cognitive, and the spiritual realm. I love this part where the Stormfather tries to explain things to Dalinar. All things have a soul, a vase, a wall, a chair. And when a vase is broken, it might die in the physical realm, but for a time its soul remembers what it was. So all things die twice. Its final death is when men forget it was a vase, and think only of the pieces. I imagine the vase floating away then, its form dissolving into the nothingness. Apart from the story, this to me is candy, taking a peek into the beyond of all. Jasnah is one of my least favorite characters so far because of her strongness and immovability. It sometimes seems as if she isn't human, really, or that she has built such a huge, impenetrable wall around herself that no one or nothing can touch her anymore. This is nicely illustrated during a dialogue between Jasnah and her spren, Ivory. They talk about Shallan when Ivory says, "She's not stable." "Ivory, you think all humans are unstable." "Not you," he said, lifting his chin. "You're like a spren. You think by facts. You change not on simple whims. Compared to other humans, you are practically a stone." I would like to quote one of the dialogues between Jasnah and Dalinar in its entirety, but that would take too long. There is so much wisdom here, and it's strongly relatable to the real world we live in. Just think of how people judged one another during the COVID period. Jasnah's atheism keeps on coming back. "I don't mind people believing what works for them, Uncle. That's something nobody ever seems to understand. I have no stake in their beliefs. I don't need company to be confident. They will try to define you by something you are not. Don't let them. I can be a scholar, a woman, a historian, a radiant. People will still try to classify me by the thing that makes me an outsider. They want, ironically, the thing I don't do or believe to be the prime marker of my identity. I've always rejected that and will continue to do so." She reached over and put her free hand on his arm. "You are not a heretic, Dalinar Kholin. You are a king, a radiant, and a father. You are a man with complicated beliefs who doesn't accept everything you are told. You decide how you are defined. Don't surrender that to them. They will gleefully take the chance to define you if you allow it." This is good advice for anyone living in our Western society. In chapter 38, many things about what actually happened in the past are explained by the Stormfather, Dalinar's spren. For about 4 pages, I practically underlined everything. So pages 415 till 420 is an absolute highlight for me in this book. I read this chapter almost without breathing. We finally get some answers, not all the answers, of course. There's only one deeper secret that the Stormfather refuses to speak of. Because, were you to know it, you would abandon your oaths, as the ancient Radiants did. I believe this is a reference to the revelation that the humans are the actual Voidbringers. As mentioned earlier on, this puts everything we have believed so far in a completely different perspective. And it certainly clarifies why the ancient Knights Radiant abandoned their vows. Somehow Lift can escape the laws of nature or storytelling the way Hoyt does. Dalinar shares one of his visions with one of the rulers. During this vision, he tries to convince her to join the unified force of Roshar against the coming desolation, when all of a sudden Lift makes an appearance. Even the Stormfather who controls the visions is stupefied. This is not possible. How did she come here? She also seems to be able to talk with Nightblood, that mysterious sword from Warbreaker. His origins still remain a mystery to me. Perhaps that is because I'm somewhat of a lazy reader, unwilling to really study a book, trying to connect dots that are hidden between the lines. Either way, all this piques my interest about the greater picture of the Cosmere. Finally, Dalinar meets Odium, the other one. He explains there are 3 of his kind who are relevant: Odium, passion, honor, and cultivation. During their conversation, I got the feeling that Odium, who up until now was branded as the evil force, may not be so evil after all. I am emotion incarnate. I am the soul of the spren and of man. I am lust, joy, hatred, anger, and exultation. I am glory and I am vice. I am the very thing that makes men. If you could see the result of honor's influence, you would not be so quick to name me a god of anger. I would say each of these gods are what keeps the world in balance. Together they create the contrast that is needed for every being to be able to experience anything. All the parts with wit, Hoyd in them, are golden. It's like we are allowed a short glance into the kitchen of the storyteller. After Wit has told the story of the 3 moons, Shallan asks him why he told that story and why now. "I don't give meaning, child," he said. "You should know that by now. I just tell the tale." Shallan asks him if he is a herald. "Heavens, no. I'm not stupid enough to get mixed up in religion again. When I was young, I made a vow. I said I'd always be there when I was needed." Each time Hoyt says something like this, I feel that it is Brandon Sanderson himself pushing through the pages. In another dialogue between Wit and Shallan, Wit says, "Failure is the mark of a life well lived. In turn, the only way to live without failure is to be of no use to anyone. Trust me, I've practiced." Later on, Wit goes deeper into Shallan's schizophrenia. "Your other minds take over because they look so much more appealing. You'll never control them until you're confident in returning to the one who birthed them. Until you accept being you. Find the balance. Accept the pain. But don't accept that you deserved it." I thoroughly enjoyed every dialogue between Shallan and Kaladin. They are witty. Here, their talk goes deeper into Shallan's schizophrenia. Kaladin, who is the only one who knows the details of her past, asks her how she keeps from fixating on the terrible things that have happened. "I cover them up. I have this uncanny ability to hide away anything I don't want to think about. How nice would it be if I could simply shove it all away? Storms." He tried to imagine it, not spending his life worrying about the mistakes he had made, not hearing the constant whispers that he wasn't good enough or that he'd failed his men. "This way I'll never face it," Shallan said. "It's better than being unable to function." That's what I tell myself, but pretending fragments me. I'm too good at pretending. There is, again, much wisdom in this scene. Shallan understands that this confrontation sooner or later will have to take place. In that respect, Kaladin understands Shallan like no other. For one who is not too keen on battle scenes, I thoroughly enjoyed the Battle of the Palace in Kholinar. There is so much more going on than just the simple fight from good against evil, which makes it all the more interesting to read. The character of Azure remains a mystery to me. When they use the Oathgate at Kholinar and are transferred to Shadesmar, the cognitive realm or the realm of thought, Azure says that she hates this place. So, she's been here before. At first I thought she might be Ciri from Warbreaker, but now I'm not so sure anymore. Perhaps she is Vivenna, Ciri's sister. On page 927, she says, "I'm from a far land, and I came to Roshar by crossing this place, Shadesmar. I came chasing someone, a criminal." We slowly get more pieces of the Cosmere puzzle, very small ones. Azure again. "I used a portal between realms. Cultivation's perpendicularity, they call it. On your side, it's in the Horn-Eater Peaks. Are those perhaps the gates that connect the different worlds?" Azure is a bounty hunter, and at that point I thought that maybe she is Silence from the story set in the Forest of Hell, but later on we learn that her bounty is a weapon, namely Nightblood. So Azure no doubt is connected to the world of Warbreaker. "Zahel?" Adeline said. "You know Zahel?" "We're old friends." Up until the end of Oathbringer, I haven't been able to identify Azure, but my guess is she is Ciri. Jasna is reading out loud from the ancient book, The Way of Kings. "You must find the most important words a man can say. Those words came to me from one who claimed to have seen the future." "How is this possible?" I asked in return. "Have you been touched by the void?" The reply was laughter. "No, sweet king. The past is the future, and as each man has lived, so must you. So I can but repeat what has been done before. In some things, yes. You will love, you will hurt, you will dream, and you will die. Each man's past is your future." "Then what is the point?" I asked, "if all has been seen and done?" "The question," she replied, "is not whether you will love, hurt, dream, and die. It is what you will love, why you will hurt, when you will dream, and how you will die. This is your choice. You cannot pick the destination, only the path." This is so incredibly profound to me. To me, these snippets of wisdom are the diamonds inside of this huge epic story. Along the way, we slowly but surely gain insight into the enormous depths of the words of the first ideal of the Knights Radiant. Life before death, strength before weakness, journey before destination. In Dalinar's case, the journey means, among other things, suffering, guilt, and shame, while the destination could be interpreted as redemption and acceptance. The confrontation between Dalinar and Odium is one of the absolute highlights of this story. Odium, being passion and no doubt the thrill as well, tries to persuade Dalinar to give him his emotional burden of his past. Odium wants to carry it for Dalinar going forward. He explains to Dalinar that he did all those horrible things because he was tempted to do so by Odium. "Blame me, Dalinar. It wasn't you. You saw red when you did those things. It was my fault. Accept that. You don't have to hurt." Finally, Dalinar decides, "You cannot have my pain." This is where Dalinar truly understands that if he wants to advance in life, giving away his pain or keep running away from it is not the way. Only by carrying his own burdens can he grow as a person. This is one of those epiphany moments that I can highly appreciate in a book. Around page 1200, for the first time, I gained some understanding of the word Sanderson. I couldn't stop underlining because everything was so important and meaningful. When reading a book of this magnitude, it is inevitable that you miss a lot of details, Easter eggs and such. There are so many aspects I have to keep track of while turning the pages. I want to follow the story. I want to understand how all and everyone is connected. I want to know which part of the history plays a role in the present. I want to solve many, many puzzles. So it's practically impossible on a first read to fully consume and understand what Sanderson has done here. Working on my script for this video, I delved deeper into this book and more connections surfaced. Somehow this is like rereading the book, which helps me to boost my admiration for the ingenious way this book is composed. Let me name just one example of this. The roles of Seth and Dalinar develop in such a way that they miraculously coincide at the end of Oathbringer. Seth, whose history still remains hidden in shrouds, develops from this strange assassin with powers into a Knight Radiant. And Dalinar is being confronted for a second time with his own history, to which he has to find some sort of peace. There are so many hints and symbolic events that support and illustrate this part of the plot. Like how Shallan at one point realizes that to be able to continue life in a meaningful way, she has to accept who and what she is and what she has done. In her own words, which I've already quoted earlier on, "This way I'll never face it." This is exactly what Dalinar is going through, with the ultimate test when Odium offers him to take away Dalinar's pain. This is nothing less than exquisite storytelling, like only a true master can pull off. No doubt many details have eluded me. Still, making these videos, putting the time in making a script in which I try to make some sense of the multitude of puzzle pieces, really helps me to get more out of my initial reading experience. I've left many underlinings or remarks in the margin unmentioned. This video is long enough as it is. Quite a few chapters really shook me up and impressed me. At points, I actually had to take a breather before continuing my read. Although I had some trouble remembering and placing the growing number of names and characters, gods, heralds, sprens, swords, surges, and so on. But everything about this book was good, or even great. Almost everything. My first step away from a perfect reading experience was when I experienced a little slog during the entire Shadesmar sequence. It took a bit too long for my taste, for Shallan, Kaladin, Azure and Adolin to find their way back to the physical realm. I really enjoyed the surrealistic atmosphere of these chapters, and we learn a lot about Spren in general and in particular about Syl's background. Still, these Shademar chapters were a bit too slow for me. I took my second step away from a perfect reading experience when I started reading the final 100 or so pages. From chapter 120 onwards, the eclipse of events that kept me on the edge of my reading seat is being paused in a way with the concluding battle. This is the main reason why this book will not score higher than the previous two in the series. Before the final 100 pages, I considered rating this book 99 points out of 100 or maybe even the full 100 points. In other words, a perfect book in practically every respect. Unfortunately, the closing of Oathbringer steered me away from that feeling. Even though a lot happens with Dalinar, the Fused, Odium and Amaram, the battle in itself made me lose interest a little. Also, the wit epilogue this time didn't touch me as deep as the ones in the previous two books. A book the size of Oathbringer has many faces, but in the end I have to give it one rating. And that is going to be the same rating as the previous two. 97 points out of 100. Still a solid 5 stars, but I would have liked to rate a book with 100 points for once. I still have 2 more to go in this series, so who knows? Speaking of, how will I go forward from here regarding the Stormlight Archive? By the time this video goes live, Wind and Truth will be available or almost available. It will probably be some time before I will pick this one up. First, I still have to read Rhythm of War, of course. But for now, I need some time away from these immense books. I will be reading Dawnshard very soon, because I love to stay in the world of Roshar, and I'm very eager to delve deeper into its mysteries. But for the time being, I'll be steering clear from the big boys. One of the lessons learned from reading Oathbringer is that I don't want a book to become my enemy. Struggling through the pages is not how I want to be reading a book. And I believe that if I start with Rhythm of War too soon, it may become a chore. Even though I love the story and everything regarding this series, the sheer amount of pages to be read could become too daunting. So I will create some space and Roshar-hunger before I commit myself to my next huge read. When that will be is anybody's guess. I won't be planning it myself anymore. Not that I don't like making plans, I just don't want to take them too seriously. Thank you very much for watching this video. Until we meet again at Dutch Greybeard.